Discovered my boyfriend's disturbing phone history, filled with child exploitation images, and now I need to escape and report him safely. I started dating David, not real name Obv, at the beginning of February. Only a few weeks after getting out of a 5-year relationship I was nervous about getting into another one, but we clicked so well that I didn't think much more about it. I fell hard and he did too. Things had been wonderful, and we were even considering moving in together at the end of the month. All 4 roommates moved out and I can't afford the place by myself. He and I have also casually spoke about not ever wanting children, and I have never seen him behave oddly around kids in the short time I've known him, so I didn't really see any red flags there. Everything seemed to indicate he had a great head on his shoulders, and we spent almost all of our time together. Last week I came into my room after making us some dinner and he was obviously masturbating. He quickly shut his phone off and I played it off like I had no idea what he was doing. Fast forward to 2 days ago, I was curious as to why he would try and hide it from me. I don't care if he watches porn, and curiosity got the better of me. So when his phone was unlocked and he left it on my bed, I quickly peeked through his search history. There was tons of porn, all the time, all conventional websites and mostly teen. I didn't think much of that, though it does kind of gross me out, and kept scrolling, and then I saw some search terms that made my heart drop into my stomach. P/do pics etc. had been entered around 5 times. I quickly put his phone away and panicked a bit. I had no idea what to think, but my intuition told me there was more to find. I couldn't imagine someone just randomly getting the urge to look it up. I know enough to know these fetishes develop over a lifetime. So last night I peeked through his photos on his iPhone and was traumatized. There were photos of me taken asleep, of my breasts, close-ups of my genitals, and even photos he had taken while I'd fallen asleep on his chest and he had put my hands down his pants. I felt weirded out and a bit violated by these photos, but it got so much infinitely worse. A bit further up in his photos I discovered around 24 photos and gifs of young children. Youngest was probably 5 or 6, engaging in sexually explicit positions, exposing their privates, and even adults engaging in sex with small girls in a couple of gifs. They all appeared to be downloaded off of the internet. I was numb, I was angry, I was devastated, I couldn't think, and I was so disturbed at what I was witnessing. I have never seen CP in my life and I can't get these horrible images out of my head. I scrolled pretty far up and didn't really see anything else of children like that, but there were definitely lots of photos of girls who would definitely fall into the petite teen category. I guess I'm just posting here because I have no idea what else to do. I don't know how to confront him and I know I must separate from him immediately, but I'm terrified of involving police. Our local police are not very useful and I don't want to get in trouble. He must have accessed these photos using my home internet. He practically already lives here as well, and was going to help me finance a new lease somewhere else. Not that that gives me any desire to stay with him, but financially I am fucked by this. Update 1. I'm still trying to work through all of your PMs because I'd like to respond personally to each of you who were kind enough to send me loving words of support. I have been pretty overwhelmed by the amount of people who have commented and through reading every last one of your thoughts. I never imagined this post would gain nearly this level of traction and visibility, and it's my hope that if I can provide some description of the course of legal action taken and what advice I used from Reddit users, other unfortunate partners who stumble upon CP and find this thread, at least in Canada, will have some idea of what recourse they can take. I also want to state that for anybody who doubts the validity of my claims, I understand. This is an absolutely fucking insane sequence of events, and as much as I wish I had the energy to make something like this up for some arbitrary karma, I don't. To provide proof, I have sent photographs of identifications and the related arrest paperwork to mods and have worked with them to verify all of what I have written. Yesterday I was picked up by my best friend Alex around 2:30. We drove around and talked for a while. I went to school, discovered it was closed, my scatterbrain completely forgot about spring break, and then we went back to his house to discuss all of the comments you had been leaving and come up with a course of action. We drank, talked, and after a few hours took a short break from staring at my phone to play some Apex. Alex dropped me back off at my house around 9:30. David was home, in my room, and immediately I noticed how he was exceptionally quiet and distant. He said he had to admit something to me. I prepared for him to admit to possessing CP, but instead he told me about how he had taken some photos of me sleeping. He felt really embarrassed about it, but he just didn't know how to bring it up. I feigned surprise and asked him if he had anything else on his phone he wanted to admit to me. He said no. I asked him to look me in the eyes and tell me that, and he did. I don't know why I was hoping so badly that he would be honest with me about the CP, but I really thought he'd admit to it then and there. Instead, he admitted he had been feeling suicidal the last few months but didn't think he would act on it. He asked me if that changed my perception of him and I said no. He grew quiet again and I left to go shower. When I came back he was getting changed and said he was going to walk for a bit and grab some food. It was about 1030 at this point. When he left, I finally lost it and broke down. I grabbed my cat and hugged him and cried and cried and cried. I was so tired and wanted to shut my brain off so badly. I grabbed my phone and dialed the non-emergency RCMP line for my city. Shaking and crying, I explained to the lady on the phone that I had discovered CP on my boyfriend's phone. She put me through to the report line and I spoke to another constable who told me I would be contacted by another officer who would provide more details. I waited for around 10 minutes. The officer advised me that he would need me to come in and provide a recorded audio/video statement. I asked if I could do it over the phone and he said no, it must be done in person so that if this goes to court, Crown Counsel has clear evidence that I was not coerced into stating what I witnessed. I don't have my full license yet and because of the late time I wasn't able to make it down there on my own via transit, so the constable said he would come pick me up, asked me if David was there and if I could safely leave without arousing suspicion. Luckily David knows about my close family-like relationship with my best friend, so I made up a lie about how my best friend got in a fight with his dad and he wanted to talk to me about it. David didn't seem to question it and I waited for the officer to arrive. He called me from a blocked number and I walked outside and down the block to his SUV. The constable and another officer greeted me, I got into the front seat and we drove to the station. During the ride I asked him about whether seizing the phone on my own was a good idea. He explained that I had done everything correctly, laying low and getting my thoughts together to take it to police without notifying David. He said if I had taken David's phone on my own that it would not have been admissible as evidence in court, they would have returned it back to him and he could have deleted all the evidence since suspicion had been roused. It was about 11:15 at this point. They placed me in an interview room and I sat and waiting for about 20 minutes. The officer came back in and explained the process of the interview, that it would take some time and to be as thorough as possible with my answers. He said we could take breaks and brought me some water. He started off by asking me details about my life, where I grew up, past employment etc. After that portion he asked me about David, what our relationship was like, whether he was nice and kind to me and anything else I knew about him. I told him he was sweet, that he had been nothing short of lovely in the time we'd been together, but I did express that things had been moving very quickly. He agreed. He then got me to explain how I came upon the photos in question, so I did. Then came the worst part. He asked me to go through, one at a time, the photos I explicitly remember details of seeing and to describe it in very, very graphic detail. Positions of the children, their ethnicity, any identifying characteristics such as clothing, circumcision etc. It was intense, but by some grace of God I was able to keep my composure and not burst into tears. Mental/emotional exhaustion was fully setting in and I was almost thankful for not having energy to bawl and provide a clear statement to the officer. He asked me if I would testify in court and I said I would. The officer left a few times during the interview to discuss with his supervisor more questions to ask during the interview and the legalities of the seizure they would attempt. The full interview took around 3 hours including all the sitting and waiting. After I had been sitting for what felt like an eternity, the officer came in and explained that they felt my interview provided enough reasonable cause to seize his phone and place him under arrest. They explained how the process would go and whether I wanted a no-contact agreement. I said yes initially, but the officer asked me if it would be easier to not have one in regards to sorting out his belongings. That made sense to me, so I chose not to move forward with the no-contact agreement. We got in the constable's car and drove down to my house with 2 other officers in 2 different vehicles, 3 in total. I told them I was more comfortable in a squad car than standing outside. I didn't want to face him, so they moved me to the back of the cop car. I've never felt so anxious in my life. I asked them to be mindful of my cats and not let them get outside. They promised they would make sure of that. About 15 minutes later I saw them bringing David out in handcuffs. My heart, which had been dissolving in my stomach's acid all day, felt completely gone. I curled up in the fetal position in the back of the squad car and waited to be told I could go back inside. After another eternity, my phone had died by this point, but I know it was well past 330. They came back and explained he was under arrest but being released with promise to appear in court at a later date. I was told by the officer I could go back in, and that they would help him find his way back to the place he had been staying previously. The officer gave me a victim services card and a hug and instructed me to snuggle my cats tightly, that I did a brave thing and to be well. I went back into my house, put Planet Earth on for background noise and called my other best friend Paige, who had been keeping up with me about this since I sent her my Reddit post. We were talking for almost 45 minutes when my door burst open. It was David. He was frantic, his eyes were wild and he was hyperventilating. My jaw dropped. Officers said they would be escorting him back to his prior residence and I was not at all mentally prepared to see him again. Paige asked me if everything was okay and I told her David had walked through the door. I would call her back. Immediately David came to the bed where I was sitting, dropped to his knees and sobbed violently. He said he didn't know I would be here, he just came to grab a couple more of his belongings. He asked me what the cops had asked myself or told me. I lied and said they had only told me they had suspicions of possession of child pornography. He sobbed more and loudly said that isn't me, this isn't who I am, and cried more and more. His body was racked with sobs and he apologized over and over again. It was immensely difficult to witness and I wish I could have told him to get the fuck out, but I just sat there immobilized, in shock. It was well close to 5 in the morning and I hadn't slept or eaten much in nearly 48 hours at this point, so my body and brain felt like they were essentially non-functioning. David began and said that this had been something he struggled with after developing an intense porn addiction in his early 20s. I asked him if he had ever been abused sexually and he said no. He said he knew how horrible it was to seek these images out, but had no inclination or desire to ever touch any children. He had never acted on these thoughts and never would. I asked him why he had never sought treatment before, and he admitted that he was terrified of what people would think. He had no idea what resources to access and he felt ashamed. He said his previous suicide attempts in years prior were directly linked to the fact that he considered himself a pedophile. I nodded. I asked him if they would find anything on his phone that would incriminate him, and he said yes, they were going to. He admitted they were very explicit photos, and I asked how he even found them. I don't recall we ever got to that. He promised me he didn't use my internet to access it, but I don't really believe that. He apologized to me more times than I could count and asked if I hated him. I told him I wasn't sure that I felt hatred for him, but I was sure of being beyond disappointed in his actions. I told him how terribly I felt betrayed and hurt and violated. I expressed my sadness in what he had done, the innocence of these exploited children, how he had so much potential to do so much good in the world, and how disappointed this was the route he chose. Then I heard a loud knock on the door and lights outside my windows. 3 officers were outside, 2 of whom I recognized from earlier, and they asked me if David was here. I said he was, and they said they were coming to perform a wellness check because Paige had called in. I realized I had completely forgotten to text her back and let her know I was okay, bless her heart. The officers took David outside and they each asked him if they had any cause to worry about his actions tonight, and he promised them they did not. I told them I was okay, that I would finish my discussion with him, and if I had any issues I had them on speed dial. They nodded and left. David sobbed and sobbed for what felt like a millennium, and I just sat and endured it. Tears just ran and ran and ran from him. He said he knew what he was saying was cliché, that he was sure I expected to hear this great big apology. He said if I thought he was being manipulative he could understand, but assured me he was at his rock bottom and wanted me to know how horrible he felt about not only what he'd done, but what I had to go through. I just nodded. There was silence for a long time. I think by this point it was around 8 or 8:30 in the morning. I don't know how long I stared at my TV screen that said, "Are you still watching, Planet Earth?" But it could have been a lifetime. I had no concept of time or what to do or say or what was the right way to feel. I think David was either silent or had fallen asleep against my bed. I didn't know or care, I was just numb. I would have probably sat like that until I died, but 2 of my 4 cats descended on my bed and meowed for food. I got up, fed my little critters and cats, and came back to my bed. My brain wasn't capable of thought, so I stared at my TV screen until I passed out sometime around 9. I didn't sleep for long because when I woke up and checked my phone it said 11:30. David was awake and crying still. When he realized I was awake he sat up and looked at me immensely pained. I just stared at him. He started apologizing and apologizing more. He expressed his life was over, he had nobody and nothing, and that I was his greatest light in life, how he never wanted to lose me. He expressed how much he cared about me and how he would do anything to win my affections back, to get me, to give him a second chance. I shook my head and he sobbed, apologizing nonstop. At this point I finally asked him to leave. I told him I needed space to sort out my emotions, and I needed to get some sleep. I asked him if he would be okay. He nodded and grabbed his things. He said he would get out of my life and not contact me if that's what I wanted him to do. I said nothing. He expressed how much he loved me and again how sorry he was, and that if there was ever any chance of anything happening between us ever again that he would be there. He said I love you about 10 million times and grabbed his bag and stepped out of my door. I've been laying in bed since then and writing this. I just want this to be over. I just want to move on and figure out how to sort the mess that remains. Also, I think I forgot to add that his court date is set for June. As far as sentencing, if he's found guilty of possession of child pornography, I believe he could be sentenced to 18 months max and a minimum sentence of 90 days. I will post updates again if I feel they are important, otherwise I will update again in June when he has been sentenced and let you know what charges are laid. Thank you all again for your support, kindness, and love. I have never in my life experienced such an outpouring of generosity and compassion, and I would have been so lost without some of your advice. I'll continue working on replying to your PMs, but in the meantime I think I'm going to try and finally get some goddamn sleep. Hello everyone. I hope you and your families are staying safe in these shite times. As I'm sure you're all aware, I've waited a long time to write this post. Thank you all for staying patient. A lot has happened in my life since I initially posted about what I discovered on David's phone. Initially, David was sentenced to court on June 11, 2019. Well, June 11th came and went, no trial. I hadn't been contacted since by the constable assigned to the case, and as much as I wanted to figure out what was going on, forgetting about David, unpacking boxes and moving on with my life was of more importance, so I didn't try very hard to reach out to the cops. A couple of times I did, but the officer assigned to David's case never directly answered my calls, and when I left messages at the detachment where he worked, I was never called back. July, August, and September passed and I still received no word from the police on what was happening with the charges. In late October, I was rang from an unknown number. When I answered, it was a female constable. She asked me if I would have any time that evening for her to stop by and discuss some things with me. I agreed and she came over to my new condo unit. She told me the old officer was no longer assigned to the case and instead it was taken on by her. She asked me to go over some more details regarding the incident and how I discovered the photos. We talked about where I thought David might be, who I thought he might have any personal connections to, things like that. She asked me some more details regarding the photos he took of me, and asked if I wanted to press charges regarding that. I thought I already had back when I initially provided an interview back in March, so I was a little confused by this, but I of course, said yes. I asked her why the trial hadn't happened in June and when she thought the charges might be finalized. She was unsure, explained that the digital forensics team was unfortunately inundated with processing/investigating devices containing child abuse material and it was taking them a while to finish processing everything related to David. I expressed that the last officer was not particularly forthcoming with any updates or information and she assured she would stay in contact with me, and give me a call as soon as she had any notable new information to share. Well, that notable update came 3 days after Christmas. I remember this because I was still in the process of unpacking boxes in my new bedroom at Alex's dad's house / when I got the call. She wished me a belated Merry Christmas and told me she had some not so fortunate news to share. Basically, David was not charged with a single thing. He never went to court. He was never added to a sex offender registry. Literally nothing. I remember yelling what the actual fuck. And why? And also, crying. Not my most contained moment, but I really can't begin to explain the frustration and anguish this news gave me. The officer was, to her credit, very empathetic and understanding. She explained that it was simply due to the way in which I discovered the photos. She explained it to me like this: basically, in Canada, the version of the American Constitution is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. One of these is a charter right to privacy. This is related to electronic devices as well. Since his phone was generally locked by a passcode that I didn't know, and I essentially went on the phone without his permission while he was asleep, regardless of my initial innocent intentions, Crown Counsel deemed it was a breach of his charter right to privacy. Therefore, all of the photos I subsequently discovered were not admissible in court, and since that was essentially the only evidence that existed, the charges had to be thrown out. Not only for the child abuse material possession charges, but also for the photos he had taken of me without my consent. I told the constable that I thought it was absolutely ridiculous, maybe some more expletives, and she actually agreed with me, but told me there was nothing more she could do. Now the case was closed, the justice system had done its job, and she gave me another number for victim services, which I pretended to write down, but didn't. So, yeah. That's it. Life was to go on. Happy fucking New Year. Some other details, mostly about me if anyone is curious. I haven't spoken to David since the beginning of May, when he called me from a payphone and decided to tell me his cat, who I had cared for over the course of a few weeks while he was in and out of homeless shelters, after I kicked him out, had a blood infection. I remember telling him I was sorry and I hoped she got better soon. I didn't say anything else, and this triggered him into blowing up at me over the phone, telling me that it was obvious I only cared about his cat and I never cared about him. I ended up getting immensely pissed off that he had the audacity to raise his voice at me over something so stupid, so I hung up. At this point, any sympathy I had for him immediately went out the window and it clicked in my head how truly, for lack of a better word, fucked he was. I was really mad. He called me back right away and, for some reason, I answered. I don't really remember what all was said then, but I do remember essentially telling him he was a disgusting predator, a manipulative sociopath, and his lack of genuine remorse for anything made me want to throw up. He tried to yell at me that I ruined his life, and I hung up the phone. For good this time. He called back a few times but I turned my phone off and that was essentially the end of any contact. His mother of all people ended up messaging me and told me that me contacting him was really bad for his mental health. This pissed me off because not only was the one who contacted me, but all of this he did to himself. And what of my mental health? I didn't ask for any of what he brought on to me. Not to make myself the victim here, but holy fuck, to say I have severe trust issues as a result of all of this would be an understatement. Those images are burned into my fucking brain. Like any normal person, prior to this if I ever saw a shirtless little kid or something of that nature, I didn't even think twice about it. But now, those things, the sounds of kids laughing, crying, triggers some of the worst shit I've ever seen to flash back in my brain. I developed chronic insomnia and my eating disorder came back in full swing, if it hadn't been for a really good network of gaming friends. Thanks Apex, and my best friend helping me to pay my bills and get into a place at such short notice, I would have been even more fucked. My animal menagerie are literally my family. Mum died 10 years ago, estranged from father, and I was this close to having to rehome them. 2019 was one of the worst fucking years of my life, and there have been a lot of shite years. But, pity party over, was it worth it? Well, despite everything, yes. It was. I'm glad I acted, and did something. I hope that the poor children involved in that material are found, are rescued, are provided with therapy and love. I hope the information I provided to police helps them rescue children, in some way. Maybe it's only a small % chance it will, but if I hadn't done anything, that small % would be a definite zero. And, I learned some important lessons. I think I moved through the world with far too much naivete prior to David. I had a huge issue with abandonment, being alone and codependency, issues I don't really struggle with so much anymore. That's why things progressed so quickly with him. He also taught me what manipulative people look like. By example. I also learned that 2 months is a laughably short period to dedicate yourself to living with someone and that 28-year-old men who are going for women significantly younger than them are probably doing so because they lack the ability to attract more mature women of their own age. So to the young birds reading this, take your time getting to know someone. Don't rush things even if the energy is strong at the beginning. You are more than the chemicals in your brain. Now, To every single person who messaged me or commented with love, please know I read every single one of your messages even if I didn't reply. To someone with none, you truly felt like a pseudo-family, and your reassurance of my actions and your thanks for doing the right thing really helped erase any doubt in my mind that I was making the wrong choice. I will always feel gratitude in my heart for your multitudes of kindness. To everyone who messaged me telling me that I was faking it, that I was just as bad a person as David, that I ruined his life, that I should kill myself, that I deserved it, I am sorry for whatever circumstances in your life have caused such anger that you feel you must lash out and try to hurt other people as well. I wish you all peace. This will be the last post I ever make regarding this. For any future folks who find themselves in a situation similar, please do not hesitate to act. Difficult things make us stronger. And you are very strong. Like Sylvia Plath said, out of the ash, I rise. Take care, everyone.